Everyone, I'd like to call to order the Lake County Board of Commissioners meeting for March 29th, our last meeting for the month. So time is flying by and spring is here. Hopefully everybody's doing well. So with that, we'll start off with item 1, which is adjustments to the agenda. Do we have any adjustments? Okay. Next is item 2. It's public comment. At this time, we allocate 20 minutes or more for speakers to come forward and bring up whatever topic that they choose to notify the board about, and we limit the time to 3 minutes per person. Do we have anybody signed up today to speak? Oh, okay. That was easy. Item 3 is commissioner's response or remonstrance. Do we have any remonstrance this morning? Okay. Next, emergency business. Do we have any emergency business?
I think this don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this guy was here for, wants to be for.
Sir, did you come to give comment today to the board?
I did.
All right. Please come forward and state your name and, I guess, city of residence, and I'll give you 3 minutes to speak.
Great.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Wayne Martin, and I live in the Harlow District. Good morning, Steve. I'm here to take advantage of your meeting and hand out something when my 3 minutes are over. A group of people have come up with a concept which one of you is already aware of and has been briefed on. And it's called Tents for 10. It's a slight bit gimmicky. The idea is to introduce a new concept that comes somewhat between the overnight camping program that St. Vinny's does for 3 or 4 vehicles or 3 or 4 tents, and the rest stop program, which offers sanctuary to as many as 20 people. This is a smaller unit than that. That's why it's called Tents for 10. And they would be small communities governed by trained homeless leaders for no more than 10 people and as few as 4. I have a draft proposal on it, which indicates some of the stipulations under which this would happen. I had a meeting with John Reese that had been planned for another purpose, and we finished that purpose, and then I just happened to have this present with me, and I handed it to him, and he was intrigued with it. He had heard about it from one of his staff people and had an opportunity to have it in front of him. He's on vacation this week, but he's going to direct his staff to discuss it and to adapt it in whatever way. Meanwhile, the steering committee is pushing on with a meeting tomorrow. I don't need to tell you the details because they're here for me to present to you. It's a delight just to have a few minutes and brief you on this. And hope that, what's my ask? That maybe you could start by having a smaller task force of 2 or 3 people just explore this concept. There are going to be far more people in Eugene at times this summer than most of us have thought about already, although it's easy enough to anticipate. And, we have the Olympic trials. We have the Bach Festival concurrent with that. We're going to have a lot of visitors. And this offers people a chance to be housed outside of the downtown area and have a place that feels more like home than many of them have. So it could be a pretty dramatic interim solution while we wait for more money to arrive for more housing. Thanks for your time.
Perfect. So just a question, you have one for everybody, or? Okay, great.
Yeah. I can pass down if you want.
We will.
I got one of these in my mailbox too, didn't I?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I was going to say each of us.
Yeah, I
It's
think
not
we
changed.
Each of us have received.
Yeah, just leave them anyway.
Please, you might actually, if you could give them to the administrator there,
Staff.
that would be
I
great.
think you've already sent us in our mailbox.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you for coming and sharing that with us today. Any others that would like to speak? Okay, so now means we've had a little public comment. Let's go back to remonstrance and comments. Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. Reverend Martin, thanks for being here this morning. You and I had a meeting with a group of, pretty good-sized group back on March 16th discussing this. That was people from multiple jurisdictions, nonprofits, and private industry were there. I'm also intrigued by the prospect, and the discussion will carry forward. So thanks again for bringing this to us. It is intriguing. You and I first talked in my living room about it better than 6 weeks ago. So it's, and I will continue to encourage you on that, Wayne. Thank you very much. Which gives me a segue into another little bit more on affordable housing. Tomorrow there'll be a round table here in Eugene. Senator Merkley has his Oregon Affordable Housing Tour that is going to make a stop in Eugene tomorrow. And there's a round table that will be taking place tomorrow. I don't have the exact time and place right in front of me, but that'll be an interesting discussion regarding regarding home funds and other federal priorities regarding the distribution of funding to local jurisdictions, to counties in particular. So that'll be tomorrow. And I'll send out a message to everybody to let people know when Senator Merkley will be here in town talking about affordable housing. Thank you.
Other comments? I would just, Commissioner Lycan.
Just real quickly, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Reverend Martin, it sounds like you spoke with City Manager Reese. Is that correct?
It is Friday.
So I'm taking this as more Eugene specific?
Yes.
Okay.
The intergovernmental meeting, I was the only person that was not Eugene.
Oh,
of the
okay.
nonprofit.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
It does need to get by the Eugene Council,
Yeah.
But no other council?
Springfield.
Okay. I was just
Sorry.
curious. Okay. I was just wondering.
Getting your point.
Thank you.
Right, and I would just add that I know our administrator has worked really closely with the city of Eugene and Springfield on rest stops and trying to provide opportunities for people that don't have any opportunities. So I'm sure that he will continue to research this, work with our partners. And also Commissioner Farr, I believe, is on our Poverty and Homelessness Board. This can be an action item, or an item that they can give guidance to. So thank you for presenting this, and I'm sure we'll be working on it. Thanks. Anything else? Okay. Then we'll move to the item 5, which is the consent. Did I do emergency business? Do we have any emergency business?
No.
Okay. Then item 5 is the consent calendar. These are a list of routine approved items. That being said, you can go to, if you're interested in any of the items on our agenda, you can go to lanecounty.org and click on the Board of Commissioners item and look at the agenda for the day. And each of these items are on there, and they also have the supporting documents that each of us get to review in making our decision. So with that, if there's no items to be pulled from consent calendar, I would entertain a motion for approval.
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimous. Thank you. Item 6 is public safety, and it is a report and performance update of the Lane County Adult Corrections Medical Contractor, California Forensic Medical Group, which is commonly called around here the CFMG. And with us this morning we have Captain Dan Buchwald. So I'd like to invite you up. I also noticed that our Sheriff Trapp is here, so and several other support folks from the Sheriff's Department. So welcome and thank you for being here. And we also have Mr. Cheney. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Stewart, members of the Board of County Commissioners. First, you already introduced Captain Dan Buchwald. I'd also like to introduce this morning Ms. Jodelle Jenks from CFMG. She traveled up here this morning to be with us to be able to answer any questions the board may have as we address this issue. I'm pleased to announce this morning that we have a good report. We had an in-depth evaluation that shows an overall good performance by our jail medical services provider, CFMG. CFMG is in compliance with its contract terms, and they're meeting or exceeding the established standards of performance. CFMG has proven to be a strong community partner, which is evidenced by correspondence that you have in your packet from the Lane County Health and Human Services, the Public Defender of Lane County, and Sacred Heart Medical Center. Our fiscal status is also good. In the nearly 4 years that we've had medical contracting in the jail, the Sheriff's Office has realized nearly $4 million in savings over the in-house services. This has prevented untold further service reductions in a crippled public safety system here in Lane County. This cost reduction allows money to be spent in other areas, such as jail capacity increases, where today we're at 317 local jail beds. We see the cost savings continue in the CFMG contract. And overall, I'm happy to report that through our jail medical services contract, the physical health of our inmates is good, and the fiscal health of the Sheriff's Office has improved. Thank you, and I now refer questions to any of the panel here.
Okay. You want questions now, or do you got more to add? Anything more to add?
Well, I just wanted to talk about one of our goals here was to be extremely transparent with CFMG as our partner. They've really stepped up to the plate as far as attending all the meetings that our command staff go to. So the interaction that we've had with Lane Behavioral Health, with Health and Human Services, with the Mental Health Summit, their role as we work with the Intercept program has been phenomenal. They truly are partners with us and this community in providing mental health and health services in the jail. And we take that very seriously.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Swanson.
Thank you. Do you think there's adequate protection for the safety of the inmates? I know in the past with our previous contractor, we had a pretty bad incident. I'm curious whether you think there will be anything like that in the future.
Well, clearly we can't predict. I would say this, that in the 4 years, if we're just going to say 4-year windows of time, we've been contracting medical services in the jail for 4 years. In that time, we've had one significant settlement of approximately $400,000. In the 4 years previous to contracting medical services using in-house medical service providers, we had one significant medical settlement for $500,000. So I think history shows that we are as liable with in-house services as with contract services. I think one of the arguments, and County Council can weigh in, is that with a contract there are some additional protections that we do not have with in-house service. One of the things that we have done is we've made some amendments to the contract with CFMG to increase the mental health services that are provided. And we're doing everything we can as far as predicting, based on our population needs, what services we need to put in place to provide the best care and the most safety for our inmate population.
Yes, if I may. Chair Stewart, Commissioners. I'll call your attention to the report that I made, that I was requested to make regarding the costs and the claims. The one trend that I think we have enough data on to talk about is that actually since we have gone to contracting out medical services, we've actually had an overall decrease in the number of claims from inmates regarding their treatment while at the jail. And the net result, as the Sheriff already indicated, is that the county is self-insured, as you know, and so for any amount of money that's a settlement for any action by our staff, we are responsible for that. We have insurance up to after $1 million, but up to that amount, or if it exceeds our limits of our policy, we're responsible for the decisions of any of our staff. And so by contracting this out, CFMG carries their own insurance with very high limits, and the responsibility for their actions, for their decisions, is covered by their insurance and not by the county.
How's the indemnity clause in this one? Last time we were given the impression that we would be indemnified for any loss, and yet, as the sheriff pointed out, we had to pay out over $400,000 and had to defend ourselves as well on top of that. So would you comment on whether there's been any change in the indemnity clause that we had? Because last time it didn't really give us much.
Well, it's hard to speculate on what an insurance company is going to do. I wouldn't, I'd rather gamble in Vegas than do that ordinarily. However, I will say that in this case, we're dealing with a regular insurance company. Our former vendor was insured with a special policy that went from Lloyd's of London, because they were a large company, and they had a large amount of control over how their company responded to claims. In this case, it's a conventional insurance policy, and you would expect that the regulated American insurance carrier would be more likely to respond to its obligations than a carrier that was ultimately a foreign carrier with a custom policy.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lyke and then Commissioner Frank.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's where I was going to go, Jim, and I appreciate you calling that out. I was actually going to go exactly where you were coming from, and because my question was going to be specifically for you, but it really comes down to the conclusion of the report and what has happened in the last 4 years, and that the resulted savings of $4 million over the last 4 years. So I think you called that out in particular just from your report, and I appreciate that. I think having your oversight involved in this has been really tremendous, and I really want to say thank you very much. And to Sheriff Trapp and Captain Buchwald and your entire staff, I mean, really excellent job. And to our contractor, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it, and I think this has shown some positive results, and so appreciate the work. Thank you.
Commissioner Parr.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain Buchwald. Thank you, Sheriff Trapp. Can you say again the name of the representative from CFMG, please?
Ms. Jodelle Jenks.
Welcome here, Ms. Jenks. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for the service that your company is providing to the jail and to the people of Lane County. You know, Sheriff Trapp, you and I spent a full day sitting in rooms in Portland when you were chief deputy, and talking about the case. I think that Commissioner Sorensen is alluding to the earlier case that we ended up paying $500,000 on out of a, what was the total?
It was a lot of money.
But we were indemnified at a great deal on that because in fact, the sheriff's deputies were not culpable for any of the misconduct that occurred, or whatever misconduct. I can't even comment on that, quite frankly. But I'm intrigued by some of the things that you said, that we have indeed had less claims since we began contracting than prior to contracting. I don't need a great in-depth report on that, but just kind of substantiate that a little bit.
Well, what I did was I reviewed our claims history. I got a printout, and then actually I talked to our attorney, Sebastian Tapia, that handles the claims. And most of these, what they are is they're claims by an inmate that says, I received inadequate medical treatment. These claims might be that I said I had a toothache and I didn't get to see a dentist promptly or something. But that's the level of most of the claims is fairly low, and ordinarily they're combined with other complaints. The greatest number of our complaints, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, are food related and not about the inmate's actual treatment at the jail.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, and I would expect if we need more information, that information is available. Captain Buchwald, thanks again for your comments that you just made. One thing I'm really intrigued with is you talked about behavioral health and the coordination with Lane County Behavioral Health that's underway right now. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And I'll give you a preface that is something that's of high importance to this Board of Commissioners and to the county in general, in that our performance auditor has identified behavioral health as being the chief risk element to the county. So we're all paying a great deal of attention. So this is of particular importance to me personally, and I believe to the entire board. How well is behavioral health being handled in the jail?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. It's one of our biggest concerns. As we're dealing with these folks that are booking into our facility, they're not coming to us healthy. They're not coming to us in the right mind. We have a lot of folks that are experiencing psychotic episodes. They pose a great challenge in how we deal with them. CFMG has done a fantastic job as far as coming in, setting the protocol for suicide watches, looking at the system in general. They're fully staffed. We couldn't hire a mental health nurse practitioner. We just couldn't find one. No one applied for this. CFMG wound up hiring a psychologist. And because in the contract they were going to supply that, they didn't charge us for the difference in cost. So we have a psychologist on hand as a full-time staff member, and our mental health specialists. They're also providing mental health training to all of our staff once a year. This is going to be an ongoing issue, and we've got plans to deal with this as far as my goal is to create a special housing area for those folks that have the most severe mental health issues, where they're receiving one-on-one treatment in the jail. We haven't been able to provide treatment in the past. We've been able to medicate, but the treatment and therapy piece hasn't been in place. And in the next 6 months, I see that happening. So our goal is to identify these folks, to start the treatment, to provide that wraparound service, that warm handoff to Lane Behavioral Health. We're dealing with the same folks that Lane Behavioral Health deals with on the outside. And we've realized that there is a need to partner, and we just can't release these folks onto the street. So we're really building bridges and working collectively to address this issue now.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that brief synopsis on that, or the brief report response on that. You know, once again, it's really of high importance to us, particularly as you mentioned, the people who come to you to the jail quite often are not in very good behavioral or mental or even physical health, for that matter. You have a tremendous load that you deal with from intake throughout the entire system. But I'm intrigued to hear you say that CFMG hired a psychologist. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about how does that work? How do you identify when somebody needs to see a psychologist as opposed to get placed in solitary confinement, for instance, or whatever it may be?
Well, what we do is we triage all inmates that come in. They're all seen by a nurse. We have a nurse that stays in booking 24 hours a day. And from there, based on staff reports and based on medical reports, depending upon their housing as well. I'll make a quick break here. We have a multidisciplinary unit that meets once a week to discuss every one of these folks. This team is comprised of a population management deputy, program deputy. It's comprised of a security sergeant. We have the HSA ESM attends this. Our nurse practitioner attends this. Our psychologist attends this. So we have a group of folks that sit down and review everybody that's housed in segregation, everybody that's on a suicide watch, everybody that has a serious management plan put in place for them. So these people are reviewed every week, and we're looking at, are they going to stay in custody? If they're looking at transitioning out, what are we doing about that? What are their needs primarily in the jail? We're reviewing their suicide watches. We're looking at multiple facets of what we can do to provide care and management for these folks. Since CFMG has been on board with us, we actually have quarterly meetings where we meet with public defenders, courts, emergency room physicians, and we discuss what's going on in the jail. We talk about grievances. We talk about public issues that carry over into the jail. So we've made this very big and very broad as far as the line of communication and what we're doing, and we're not hiding anything because this is a community issue.
Well, thank you for elaborating on that. I know there's far more you could say about it. You did touch on a special housing area. Now, we used to have, I believe it was a 12 or 16-bed psychiatric unit in the jail, which is no longer there, of course. But
well, that was a psych hospital. I'm referring to, we've recently opened up the East Annex as we've expanded staff. We used to have a special needs area out there where we actually had mental health come and visit that area each day. We had deputies that received special training for folks that have mental health issues, and we worked with them on an individual basis. My goal is that once we can get deputies hired and we're fully staffed, that we can open that again.
Excellent.
And really be able to deal with these situations, treat them differently because they need different treatment.
So that's something that's separate to what used to be the psych unit?
Correct.
Okay.
That's totally in-house.
But it's still a pretty proactive. Is it fair to say that you have a proactive approach to the mental health issues?
I certainly hope so, yes.
And I'd like to hear more about that as we progress, because it is, once again, of significant importance to the the board and to me personally regarding behavioral health issues, particularly surrounding, you have people come in there with substance abuse issues, for instance, that are very significant to be able to take care of. Just kind of out of curiosity, the psych unit, when did that close? Approximately what year?
I can't remember. I'll just clarify. I don't remember the exact year. 5? Yeah, I think 2005. We have to probably confirm that date. But the psych hospital, which has been was renamed the Sherman Center, that was never operated by the sheriff's office. It's a little confusing because that facility is connected to the jail. It's part of the jail building. But the psych hospital function was managed and operated by Lane County Behavioral Health, and in partnership with state funding. And so I don't have a lot of familiarity as far as the operations and that program specific, other than the nature of the facility required the physical security consistent with a jail facility, and so it was co-located there. And deputy sheriff staff would provide support routinely with assistance with their patients. And so it was a good partnership, but it was not part of the sheriff's jail operations. The people in that facility were not in criminal justice custody. They were not in the custody of the sheriff. They were there for treatment through the mental health system, either on director's holds or other commitment orders.
Thank you, Sheriff, for that clarification. Yeah. So the special housing area is something that's separate of that, and the men and women who may be housed there in the future.
It is within the jail.
Are people who
and
have
not to
been
be confused with
sentenced.
the psychiatric hospital that once was.
Thank you. That's a clarification to me that I wasn't aware of fully prior to the discussion today. Well, thanks very much. I'm really I'm pleased to get this report. I'm pleased to hear the proactive approach to behavioral health in particular. Look forward to seeing more as the contract continues. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for your support.
Mr. Mokaiski, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to add to the discussion about mental health services in the jail. And I have an article on my desk written by Richard Sherman in which he talks about, in 1999, the estimate of the number of inmates in the jail with mental illness was 30%. And if you ask the sheriff today, they'll say approximately 60% of inmates in the jail. And I would speculate that number is fairly conservative. When we look at our community health centers, we know the number of individuals that are coming to our 6 community health centers, 70 to 80% have mental health issues there. So we know that this is a significant issue. When we toured the Eugene Mission recently, you heard Jack Tripp say that they are the largest mental health facility. They're housing the largest number of individuals with mental health issues in our community, and arguably the jail rivals that designation. So as we plan for the fiscal year 16-17 budget, which will be presented to the Budget Committee on May 3rd, and we'll have more discussion about this, I want to share with the board today, without getting into details, that we're having a significant amount of conversation with the Sheriff's Office, with behavioral health staff, around how we can continue to, not only on the medical side of services, providing medical services to individuals with mental health issues, but also make sure that we're creating opportunities to transition individuals out of the jail and into services in the community. And so there's a lot of work that's going into that, conversations in the community about how we coordinate mental health with the criminal justice system. And again, specifically as it relates to the budget for next year, we're looking at the possibility of investments that could provide additional services, mental health services to inmates in the jail, and make sure that as they transition out of the jail and into the community, that they're set up for longer term success rather than the cycle of recidivism that we oftentimes see. So we'll continue that conversation in the next couple months, but I just want to share that for some context with the board, that it's a good discussion and one that we need to continue to have.
Mr. Farr, quickly.
Just very briefly, and Ms. Mulker, actually, you mentioned the tour that you and I and Commissioner Stewart, and I believe Sheriff Trapp, were on that tour of the Mission, which is a private facility. And it's moving forward with the mental health issues, it's once again of the utmost importance. And the fact that the mission provides the largest mental health services in Lane County, I don't know how accurate that is. We have a pretty robust behavioral health system in 6 different thoroughly qualified health centers in Lane County. But the fact that we are beginning to realize that it is of the utmost importance once again, and the more we talk about it, the more we get it in front of this Board of Commissioners, the greater the response we're going to provide. The other thing I'll mention is that, a lot of the men and women who come to the jail with behavioral health issues are living on the street and not in housing. Permanent housing is essential, and we're moving forward on that. We're moving forward on housing first issues, for instance, that will take some of the men and women on the street with behavioral health, including substance abuse issues, and put them in regular housing, which is going to take a great deal of pressure off of the public safety system, off of the justice system, and potentially provide some relief in that respect, getting men and women who need special services that are not Sheriff's Department related, not jail related, getting men and women into those services prior to them visiting your facility. So thank you very much once again.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up that the Eugene, as a clarification, that the Eugene mission has stated that they're housing the largest number of individuals with mental health issues, not necessarily treating them. And that's one of the issues that they face, is they have 400 individuals that they house per night. They're not providing the mental health services that are necessary for the individuals that need those services. So these are the conversations we're trying to have, is how do we make sure those services are available in the community and in our corrections facility.
And Housing First will provide casework. Thank you.
Mr. Lakin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a question I have, and this goes along with Commissioner Farr's comment from the very beginning. So we have the auditor, our performance auditor, has identified behavioral health, public safety is high risk within the county. And given that this is where she's going to be going down this audit, and after the audit, a recommendation comes back that we may need to put significant more focus on that. I guess the question I have then, it comes back to the business side of this and the contract we have with CFMG. If there's a requirement for additional resources on that end, my question to CFMG, and are we okay to invite Ms. Jenks up to just maybe quickly answer a quick question? If you're okay with it. I want to make sure you're comfortable with this, and so my question would be, if it comes back that we need to allocate additional resources for this, is CFMG in a position to equip Lane County Sheriff's Department with those additional resources? Of course, my guess is we're going to have to probably renegotiate the contract, which I completely understand. But my view also is, if you spend a little money up front, the savings into the future could be very significant. So my question is CFMG in a position to potentially provide those additional resources, especially on the behavioral health end?
Thanks, Commissioner. Yes, we work very closely with Captain Buchwald and the Sheriff's Department to discuss not only our current services, but try to anticipate needed services in the future, and especially with the mental health population, there's always a need to do more. You're never going to hit the point where you've done enough. And we look at every opportunity. We certainly would cooperate and do whatever we could to help identify those resources. I will tell you, and based on our inability to find a psychiatric nurse practitioner, that not just in Eugene, but in every program in which I'm associated with, mental health providers are challenging. Yep. We always want to look locally. I think it's very important to keep your local citizens employed and bring in your local nurses and providers, but when that fails and we can't locate locally, we will recruit nationally. You look where you have to look and find the services.
I have a standing meeting with the administrator of McKenzie-Willamette Hospital, and we meet once a quarter. And even from the private sector, it's significant. I mean, they're challenged in finding, especially different, whether they're PAs, assistants, even, or let alone, licensed psychologists, psychiatrists, let alone licensed, physicians. And even on the private side, where they're having to offer signing bonuses, where we're a government. We don't have that opportunity to offer that up. And so I understand that. I think that's significant, and I really appreciate that answer, and I continue to I value the work we're doing with you, and I appreciate this report's really strong, and I think it's a good report. So I thank you very much for that answer. Sheriff Trapp, I guess the question I have for you then is, as you talk to your fellow sheriffs around the state and within the Sheriff's Association, are they, do you hear the same things happening in other county jails around the state as far as behavioral health is concerned? And it's my understanding from not only yourself, but even my fellow commissioners in Marion County, that they may have a worse crisis on behavioral health issues than even Lane County does within their jail. What's your comment as far as other sheriffs around the state, and are they also contracting out? Is it being done inside, and are they looking to also look at the behavioral health side and public safety as a significant area to attack?
Right, so I'll try to remember all the pieces there. Most of my information is anecdotal. I don't have a hard data report from OSSA that responds to those specific questions, but across the state of Oregon, all sheriff's jails are seeing a similar population with the mental health challenges that we're seeing here. The last report I heard from Marion County from Sheriff Myers was that his jail population was at 50% with mental health, behavioral health issues, and that was what prompted me to ask the question from our jail to do a new census and see where we were at, which came back at a 60% level. And so the sheriffs in general conversation have all agreed that this is a significant issue in their jails. And I don't know the number also of the ratio of contracted medical services versus in-house. And there's clearly a mix. We're certainly not the only jail in Oregon that's contracting. And we actually looked to other jails in our initial process to switch over to see how others were doing it, as opposed to blazing a trail on our own. So if somebody's already done it, it's certainly easier to look around for lessons learned. So it's a mix. I think probably not out of the 36 counties. Not every county has a jail. There's some shared jail facilities in the Northeast, but I don't know that it's a 50-50 split on contracted services. So I'd have to do a little homework to see if you have an interest in a hard answer. I'd have to check a little bit deeper.
I mean, don't prioritize that as your top priority. So we'll put it this way, just out of curiosity, and I think just conversations you're having with your fellow sheriffs. I'm not interested in hard data, but I think it's more or less what you're hearing from your colleagues around the state. So,
Commissioner,
yes,
if I can, the majority of the counties do have contracted medical services. Some of the smaller ones don't because they can't. Their housing is just too small.
Right.
So they work with the local medical services. And then I believe Multnomah still has their own, but they still have contract pieces that they use with that. But the majority of counties do have contract medical.
Very good. Thank you very much. Ms. Jenks, thank you. Really appreciate you sharing that. The report's great, and I think the relationship we have here with the CFMG, I think we're starting off very, very well, and appreciate it. Thank you. Did you have anything else to add, Sheriff?
No, I was just going to follow up just a piece on your question with Ms. Jenks on the services, potential for enhancing the mental health, behavioral health services. That's one of the pieces that Administrator Mokrahisi spoke to, is that the ongoing effort here is, I think the strategy we're pursuing in the short term isn't necessarily relying entirely on the contract, while CFMG has been very responsive to our request for bolstering that portion of the service in the contract. I think we will see an overall better response in the community when we partner with behavioral health and integrate local behavioral health through Lane County's Health and Human Services with the CFMG services in the jail. And then the idea there is that there would be an outside of the jail carryover through HNHS as that person transitions out of the jail. So we're looking at that, and CFMG is very responsive. We will continue to rely on them for their expertise and adjust the contract. And you're exactly right. Any service change will be a contract amendment, and we're very involved in having those discussions now to see if we can bolster the service level here to provide a better quality of care and reduce our liability as a county.
Well, I just want to make sure you know that my business hat was put on, and I would not object if we knew that the long-term value was going to be greater, that you wouldn't object to renegotiating a contract if those needed resources need to be put in place so that the value is greater in the future. I think that's the important piece that I want to make sure I reflect on that as well. So
Absolutely.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. First, I want to say I'm really pleased with the report and the relationship we've developed with CFMG so far. I'm particularly pleased about the concentration on mental health and behavioral health that we've developed through this contract. Both of our large claims that have been mentioned earlier were mental health issues. And in particular, Mr. Kemp was an extreme case of that. But that was while we were still internally supplying medical services at the jail from county staff. And it was actually the larger of the two claims. One of the things I was going to ask Mr. Cheney, when you did your calculation of cost savings, you basically probably took whatever we had in projecting our mental health staff, our medical staff at the jail forward to this year, just, inflating salaries, et cetera. Did that include adding in this extra piece that we now have from CFMG of having behavioral health specialists and some of that training, or was it just kind of carrying forward what we were staffing in the jail at the time, as you looked at what the cost would have been today versus what the contract cost is?
Commissioner Bozovich, the response to that is, first, I didn't prepare those figures. Those are the same figures that have been, that's the way it's reported to the budget committee. And however, I do understand that those costs include the actual costs of the CFMG agreement and not prospective costs, but actually reflect what we actually expect to pay, including the services we've provided for.
So I guess then, if you didn't actually prepare the Lane County service cost estimate, that's what I was referring to really there, was did that, the projected cost of $4,138,955 for FY 15-16, was that a roll-up of what our staff used to be, or is that an estimate of what it would take to replace what CFMG is providing us today, which I think is more than what we were providing back when we discontinued self-provision of medical services internally versus where we are now? Do you have any idea?
I'll take a stab at that without our fiscal office staff here. I'll start with this caveat. We recognize the further we get from fiscal year 11-12, the less reliability these estimates have. We were very confident in fiscal year 12-13 because we were budgeting for that next year and planning to spend exactly that amount on that population for those known services. The first year of the contract ended up being 12-13. And so we had a direct comparison of what we knew we were budgeting and planning to spend versus what we contracted those services for. The next year then was a little less accurate or reliable because there was more speculation and forecasting involved. And then as you move away from that first contracted year, each year becomes more and more forecasted or estimated. And so we're about at the point, I think, in my opinion, that from here forward, it's going to be really difficult to guarantee that we have a specific value in savings. And I think, though, that the trend shows we're clearly saving money, and I expect the trend to save money through contract to continue, both in the direct costs of providing the medical services and in a reduced liability cost in the legal side of this. So as I understand this forecasting, though, we tried to put as many apples to apples in each comparison, so to make those same adjustments as on the way through. But again, they're forecasts and estimates as we move farther away from the actual numbers.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was trying to get to the meat of is the estimated almost $4 million we've saved over the past 4 budget cycles may actually be greater my guess is whoever did the projected cost probably stayed on the conservative side to not exaggerate the cost savings. So, if we look at, did they actually account for having, a psychologist involved in the staff of the jail versus just medical staff, that may not have been accounted for very well, and the cost of that. So I think we're actually getting a bigger bang for our buck and a more tailored service right now with the contract with CFMG than we were getting when we were internally staffing this, and our ability to be more flexible and talk about what are our future needs. We're not locked into having to make changes and dealing with the difficulty it is to be as flexible with internal staff as it is to be with contracted staff. So I really appreciate the report, and I really support the continued contract with CFMG, and I really support how you're working with the behavioral health side of things and working with H&HS and also CFMG to put all that in place, because like you said, 60% of our inmate population has a behavioral health issue, which is a pretty high percentage, and if we can kind of deal with that, we might be able to start dealing, lowering our recidivism rates and meeting some of the goals under House Bill 3194 and other initiatives that the state has in place to try and reduce our use of the prison population, because quite often the untreated behavioral health issues lead to higher level of crime. Eventually it becomes a felony and they end up in the prison system, and it'd be great to intercept some of these folks while they're still the misdemeanor and lower level, and we can get them in treatment, stabilized, and back into society versus ending up in our prison system where it's even more difficult to deal with a behavioral health issue. So I really appreciate the work that both the contractor and the jail staff have been doing on that side.
Well, I guess it's probably all been said, but I want to go ahead, Mr. Cheney.
Sorry, Chair Stewart. Commissioners, I wanted to mention that one of the things that's included that wasn't discussed in Captain Buchwald's report is a recommendation that we renew this agreement for an additional year. And given that we're at the end of March and planning for next year, I just wanted to confirm that that's something that you would expect to come forward that you would expect to come forward in the next month as that contract and the final details are negotiated based upon next year, that you should expect to see that coming forward. And if there's an objection to that, probably the jail staff needs to know it now.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll try to answer that question first. Is there any objections to moving forward? Commissioner Sorn?
I'm just curious about these private jail contracting. I know I was against the first one, and now we have the second one, and I'm hearing a lot of positive energy around this, but hasn't there been problems with this particular company? I mean, aren't we? Before I brought this up, and people say, well, that was in Idaho. I mean, what's that got to do with Oregon or whatever? Then it turned out that, they were pretty bad, and they didn't even upheld. Now, with this company, we're hearing, again, very positive things, and company's representatives flown all the way up here, and I'm hearing very positive things about the day-to-day working relationship. But we're not hearing the other side of it, and I don't know. I mean, are you aware of, like, the Sacramento Bee did an investigation of this company and the number of deaths in the jails in California? I'm sure that they have some response to that because they're the subject of the investigations there, but I just like to hear a little bit more about this.
Can you clarify? You say this company, but you refer to the time frame of Corizon, and then you're...
Well, I was referring, in my first comments, I was referring to Corizon because I think they were really rotten to Lane County, and they cost us a lot of money, and I don't want to see that repeated. And I'm hearing a lot of very positive things about this company, but I'm also aware that there have been some pretty serious allegations Not by me. Not by me. I'm just a guy reading on my computer. Okay? And I just want to know if anybody's ever looked into this.
Serious concerns against the current contractor, CFMG.
Yeah.
And so my answer is I personally am not aware of any significant concerns. And if there are some, I'd be more than willing to take a look and see how those may or may not apply to or affect Lane County. I will tell you, in response to your first portion of your comment, is that when we first were discussing contracting for food and medical, we didn't want to do it either. But we were at a point where it was close the jail, close patrol, close all of public safety, or look at different ways of doing business. And the fact that we have saved an approximate $4 million in 4 years has allowed us to maintain services in other areas that we would otherwise have foregone. So it wasn't a decision taken lightly. We knew it displaced Lane County employees. And the reality is it's saving money. The reality is it's costing us less in liability. And so from a business perspective, it does appear to be the right way to go. And so knowing what we know now, I'm comfortable with the decision. It wasn't an easy decision when we did it in 2012. But that's water under the bridge, and to reverse course and go back to an in-house system is almost impossible to restore. It would be exceptionally expensive to reverse course and go back to the restoration of an in-house service. We recognize that in all services that we provide. If we cease providing those services and contract out with whatever that is, we know the ability to get those back and perform them at the Lane County level, at the Sheriff's Office level, is close to none. So these are not decisions taken lightly or in any way expecting that if we do this, it's just a matter of a budget year or two and then we can reverse course. We knew this was all in when we did it. And the reality is, I don't think you're going to find a company anywhere that hasn't been sued by somebody. And I know that looking back over our history, we're perfectly capable of getting sued all by ourselves. And so what we do see is a reduction in that liability with both companies, as bad as either one may have as a reputation.
Well, I'm not writing this. The Sacramento Bee is writing this, and it's California Forensic Medical Group is the state's largest for-profit correctional health care company delivering medical service in 27 counties. A recent spike in jail deaths has prompted investigations into allegations that the company is making profits at the expense of inmate health. Okay, this is from the Sacramento Bee. Okay, and this is from 2015. Okay, and I'm not hearing any critique of this company. I'm just hearing it's all going great, and I heard the same thing when I brought up newspaper articles before. So, you know, I'm openly a skeptic of this. I'm very honest about that, and all I'm saying is if you and the folks at the county counsel's office would take a look at this, be mindful of it, it would certainly be an improvement. And as for extending the contract, you know, I'm hearing that the majority of the board wants to do this. They may not know the information I just provided. I don't know, but I'm hearing that the board wants to go ahead with the contract. I'm retaining some bit of skepticism on it, and if I'm relying upon old information, I get that. But on the other hand, it's the same kind of thing we heard before.
Understood. Thank you.
Commissioner Fart.
You know, Commissioner Sorensen brings up some interesting points. I'm reading the same articles right now. It's all available online, January 30th, 2015. There are subsequent follow-up articles in the Ventura newspaper also that you'd want to read as well, which kind of refute a little bit of what was stated in the Sacramento Bee article. So look up everything. So thank you.
All right. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. First, I'll say I'm supportive of continuing the idea of negotiating an additional year on the contract this time. You know, of course, that'll come back to the board for adoption and all that stuff, but at least not to change course or anything or direct you guys to look elsewhere. I will mention that contrary to the picture that Commissioner Sorensen paints of Corizon having cost the county lots of money, we saved over $3 million in comparison to internal staffing at the jail during the period Corizon worked for us, and we had one claim we paid for $400,000 plus some internal costs, so you might even call it $500,000. That's still a savings of $2.5 million. I don't see how anyone can equate that to costing us money. So that I'll just start with that fact. Second, looking at the Sacramento Bee's article, they did absolutely no comparison of similar populations in other counties around the state or the country as to how many inmate deaths happen per year and how many claims are filed per year against whether it's internal medical staff or external medical staff. One of the things that happens with jails, unfortunately, because you have a certain level of population, there's going to be a certain number of deaths per year. People die. It's a statistical thing. And sometimes they die while in custody. And quite often folks want to blame somebody for that and thus file lawsuits. Whether they have merit or not is a whole other thing. Whether it's statistically higher than other areas isn't shown in the Sacramento Bee article. So I would take the Sacramento Bee article with a grain of salt until I could see comparables. Because some of these counties they're talking about, their jail populations dwarf, some of our prison populations in Oregon. So, yeah, just to kind of put things into perspective. So, with that, I'm really pleased so far with what we've seen out of this contract, the flexibility in it, the focus on behavioral health, and I would support moving forward with negotiating an additional year.
Well, again, I'll get to my comments. So, first of all, I want to thank everyone for the report today, for the transparency. I do greatly appreciate our partnership with excuse me, the CFMG folks. It's been reported to this board multiple times about the flexibility, the desire to provide better service, the recognition that we have mental health needs, bringing in more mental health experts, and of course we all recognize we're not ultimately performing at where we would like to be. Unfortunately, we have to make decisions based with the resources that we have available. That being said, in 2012 when we had to make this change, we were faced with some very difficult decisions. I appreciate Sheriff Trapp's recognition of the challenges of the decisions. I don't think there was a single person on the board that desired to move in that direction, other than the fact that we had to cut over $6 million, maybe even $8 million out of our budget that year, and we were faced with, do we want a jail operation? Do we want a patrol system in this county that functions at any level? And we had to make some very difficult decisions. And I really appreciate the fact that those decisions that we made, as difficult as they were and the transitions that had to be made, we were able to save some resources and continue to provide services in this county. And that's what we're elected to do at this body. And as has been represented, everybody has some great opinions and some very valid concerns, and respectfully, I think we need to hear these things. So I appreciate that correspondence. I did want to also say that in 2005, if I remember correctly, it was my first year in service, we actually cut the ribbon on the Sherman Center, so that wasn't when we closed it. I believe when we had to close it was in 2008, when we had to let about 100 employees go just alone in the Sheriff's Department. I think there was another 40 in other departments, so we had to drastically downsize. So I think, I'm not saying it was 2008, but there's a really good chance that we only operated that facility for about 3 years, which is unfortunate. It was very, very positive service that we provided, and it would be nice someday to be able to do that again. So with that, Ms. Jenks, thanks for making the trip up here, and if you can enlighten the board with any additional information about some of the questions that were raised recently in the last conversation, I'd welcome passing them through the sheriff. So with that, thank you, Sheriff, Captain Buckwald, Mr. Cheney, and Ms. Jenks for the presentation today.
Thank you, Chair Stewart and Commissioners.
And I think I heard one positive, another shake, so there's at least 4 of us that are in support of continuing the partnership. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So next is item number 7. And it's, we have 2 items here. The first is Order 16-03-29-07. It's in the manner of documenting County Council's annual performance evaluation. I'd like to welcome Ms. Edwards, our Human Resources Director, for the conversation. Good morning.
Chair, there are a couple things I was in the back of the room, and with the indulgence of the board, I think I can answer a couple of questions that came up about the previous agenda item.
Okay.
Just to answer the question that was asked, with the prior to contracting the services, the county owned 100% of the liability for anything that happened in the jail. So the one case that was referred to, where the county, because there was our own staff doing the treatment, the one referred to as Mr. Kemp, he did not die. That cost the county $500,000 to resolve that matter. The other one that's been referred to that happened under the watch of the previous medical provider, that cost the county $400,000. That was a death, and the Horizon ended up paying over $6 million, either $6.8 or $6.9 million. The other thing I wanted to point out was that the contract and the system that has been established with CFMG was actually the topic of a presentation at the Oregon County Councils Association, and is being viewed as a model by other counties in terms of all the issues that you heard here in terms of the cooperation. The reality is there's absolutely no way that we can provide the same level of service and sophisticated and substantive level of mental health services that these providers can bring. And you've heard all the reasons why that is so important. And finally, because I do track these claims, on an absolute decreasing, there were more claims against our staff for more money than there were under Horizon. There were fewer complaints. Obviously, we had the one big case involving the one inmate, and then now we just do not see the kinds of complaints that we saw on a regular basis, even when it was our own staff providing the services. And the final piece is I can get that answer for you, Commissioner Like, and I can easily put out on the listserv who has contracted services and who hasn't. I'd be happy to provide that to the board. So I'm sorry, I was back there. I want to make sure you had all the information.
So, Ms. Edwards.
Thanks for allowing me to be here this morning. As you know, we're here to document County Council, better known as Mr. Stephen Dingell's annual performance evaluation. So Mr. Dingell was hired on January 8, 2013. And this March 1st of this year, the board met with Mr. Dingell in executive session to conduct the employee's 3rd annual performance evaluation. HR gathered feedback from Mr. Dingell's peers, customers, and subordinates. Department directors and other key staff were sent forms and asked to provide their input regarding County Council's performance for the past year. 25 individuals were given the opportunity to participate, and 17 chose to respond. The feedback reflects input for the 4 values and 4 competencies described in the board's strategic plan, and I'll just review those for you real quickly. Values: diversity, respect, and empathy, pursuit of excellence and stewardship, customer service and public engagement, integrity, open, and accountable. The 4 competencies are working with others, business acumen, personal effectiveness, and communication. The feedback, including comments, were provided previously to the board on March 1st. and that those comments were provided to aid you in providing Mr. Dingle with a performance evaluation. As a recommendation for you to use as a guide in conducting that performance evaluation, describe specific examples that demonstrate the most outstanding contributions and or achievements of the employee with regard to his job performance. Describe specific examples of things the employee could improve upon in order to increase his job performance, and provide goals and objectives for the coming year. And the options, the board can determine that Mr. Dingle's performance has been successful or better, or the board may determine that Mr. Dingle's performance has not been successful. So with that, I'll allow you to address Mr. Dingle.
Okay. Comments? Commissioner Parr?
No comment. I was going to make a motion.
Okay. Commissioner Parr?
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt order. I move order 1603-29 in the matter of documenting County Council's annual performance evaluation, which includes the line, Mr. Dingle's evaluation has been deemed successful and recorded as such.
And I would add just that the order is 1603-29-07.
07, thank you.
So, we have a second?
Second.
Okay. I'd just like to state that, we had a very good executive session, was able to, review the evaluation. I would state publicly that my recollection of that was a very good review. And, personally, my interaction with Mr. Dingle has been excellent. I think that if we could find a way to clone him so that he could do more, we would be in better shape. But, you do an excellent job in, I believe, trying to give us all the information to help us understand the pitfalls of decisions or the values of making decisions. Very impressed with, like I said, you, I think, start at sometimes 4:30 in the morning. I'm receiving emails, and many times you're here past the time, the 5 o'clock time to leave, and you're incredibly responsive. Your staff, I'm very thankful for the staff that you have surrounded around you, and the great work that you're doing for the county. So, my opinion, a very positive review, and thank you for the great work that you're doing for Lane County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would want to say that it really is the team. I know a lot of times it seems like I'm the face of this, but you saw just one example today with Mr. Cheney and the fantastic work that he did, working with the Sheriff's Office, working with CFMG. That was a very complicated contract, taking what happened with Corizon and working it through and coming up with a better result, which in my opinion has resulted in better services being provided, overall reduction in cost for not only the sheriff but for the county, and lowering our risk profile. And I think that's sort of just one example of many that that my staff has worked on, trying to do more with less.
Other comments? Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. I just want to take a few moments to say why we said it was a successful performance evaluation. I've mentioned this before, but Mr. Dingle's tenure here has truly changed how Lane Legal helps the entire county. Came in here with a philosophy of risk management and avoidance versus response to an issue. And you started the working within the law training for supervisors, which has dropped our grievance rate with unions down to a minimal level, claims from employees down to minimal levels. You've worked with your staff and have changed how you track cases that you're managing and workload to where our responsiveness to other departments has improved so much. One of the problems prior to your tenure was, if there was things would happen before you guys had a chance to weigh in with a legal opinion on it. Now we're not seeing that, and particularly if you look at land management, we had an issue where people were taking us to task for being too slow, and part of that was our ability to work with land management on the legal side, because it's such a legal construct doing any land management decisions, and we were processing all that within our 150 days that we're allowed to for a local decision now without any problem at all. We haven't seen anything go to district court out of that. Working with contracts, bringing Mr. Cheney on, right away we saved a huge amount of money just in looking at a contract about energy tax credits and who actually benefited from that. And I think he paid his first year's salary and then some in a single review of a single contract. Workers' comp, the way you've changed the way we deal with workers' comp and settling those claims and not having them be continual and challenging that. I can't remember the figures right off the top of my head, but I reviewed it in my state of the county this last year, but it was a pretty incredible amount of money we're saving just because of the way we changed our workers' comp processing. But I want to end by just noting one thing, and it's just the advice you've been able to give this board and the fact that you have such good advice for us that we're all, even though you're talking to 5 pretty strong individuals that like to go our own way quite often, we adhere to that advice at times. And the advice has been so good at times that we have avoided, in a case where we had multiple whistleblowers in our previous administrators firing, we haven't seen a single legal claim from that case. Whereas I read the newspaper daily, and if it's not the state paying off their former IT person, or it's Springfield, police department, or it's the city of Eugene's former assistant auditor, or whatever, if you Google whistleblower in the Register Guard, you can come up with 10 or 12 articles in the last 2 years where there have been hundreds of thousands of dollars paid out by local entities purely on whistleblower claims. And you managed to walk us through something legally and explain to us what our responsibilities were to protect those whistleblowers. And we took a lot of heat for it. We all remember how much heat we took for the redacted report. And believe me, none of us really we would all have loved to release that report at the time, but we understood how important it was for us to protect our whistleblowers and our employees and to make them feel secure so employees could come forward in the future in Lane County. And that single example for me stands out in my mind of what a wonderful job you've done as our council, besides all the other stuff I mentioned. That Lane County, in probably one of the most high-profile whistleblower cases with multiple whistleblowers involved, hasn't paid a whistleblower claim. And so respected those whistleblowers' rights that I feel like all of our county employees would feel comfortable stepping forward and reporting anything internally to HR and legal of a problem they thought was going on. So I really appreciate your tenure here at the county and the work you're doing.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to say, Steve, I would just ditto the comments that have been made, and thank you for your excellent work and your advice to the board. But I must say I am thoroughly disappointed today that after the huge victory by the Oregon State women's team into the Final Four, you're not wearing an orange and black tie, and I'm stunned by that. And
Orange folder.
I know you have an orange folder, but I need to point that out. And the fact that, I must tell you, it's just extraordinarily disappointing.
Commissioner Lyken and I am guilty as charged. I did not realize until I put on my tie this morning when I got here that I did not do one of my 6 Oregon State ties. But I do want to take this opportunity to to congratulate the Oregon State women on making it to the Final Four for the first time in history. They are the Western Regional Champions. Yeah. As well as the Pac-10 Tournament Champions and the co-Pac-10 regular season champions.
Go Beavs. Other comments? All right, we have a motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
He's whistling the fight song all morning, though.
So Miss Miller, Miss Edwards, sorry. Is it possible to have another item, do the Travel Lane County
Oh, that's absolutely
item next? And is that all right, Miss Miller, Shanda? Okay. So if I can, I'd like to, and I should have probably did this before. I thought these items might be a little quicker. I'd like to jump ahead because we have some folks in the audience. They're patiently waiting for, I believe, item B under county administration. It's order 16-03-29-09 in the matter of making an award of grant funds based upon a request for qualifications for visitor marketing services and delegating authority to the county administrator to finalize the grant terms and execute grant documents. We have with us Assistant County Counsel James Chaney. We also, I hope, will be Sarah Case, our Acting Community and Economic Development Manager, and possibly Ms. Moody, our Budget and Financial Planning Manager. So I don't know who wants to take the lead on this. It looks like
Chair, I'll just make a couple introductory comments while Jim gets settled here. To note that in October of 2015, we had a discussion with the board and recommended moving forward with an RFP process and changing from the prior structure of the agreement that we have currently with Travel Lane County to a grant process. And of course, the board will note that in 2013, we did a request for proposals, and an agreement was executed with Travel Lane County. You've heard regular updates from Travel Lane County over the past couple years and the great work that they have done providing visitor marketing services throughout Lane County. And what we wanted to do here is, as that agreement is coming to a close, in anticipation of that, we wanted to balance a process by having an open and transparent process that creates stability of funding and marketing, particularly given the large-scale events and many new visitors that we anticipate coming to our community over the next several years. So again, we went through this. We had this discussion in October of 2013. The board approved moving forward with this grant structure process for allocating TRT funds for visitor marketing. The change to the grant process, we believe, to a grant process both simplifies the relationship between the county and the ultimate grantee and allows the board more discretion in making awards and defining the grant, and again creating that stability of funding and marketing in this area for us. So we're asking, after you hear the presentation from Mr. Chaney, we have additional staff that's available for any questions that you may have. We're asking the board to make a decision on how the funds should be allocated and direct the administrator to engage in discussions with the grantee to come forward with an agreement, including identifying ways to allow for stabilization of funds and services in the downturn of any economic downturn that we may see. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Chaney to walk through the process that we went through.
Great.
Very well. Chair Stewart, Commissioners. I think most of this is laid out in this memorandum, which I tried to keep brief. But really what we did is we converted to this grant process. The grant process is significant in a couple of ways. One thing about the grant process is it gives the Commissioners a broader discretion in the allocation of funds. The other thing is, by contracting, practically what we were doing in the past is we've been granting the funds and calling it a contract, but without a lot of performance parameters for how we would measure a contractor's performance. In this case, by doing a grant, what we're doing is saying, you propose to us what you would do if we gave you money and how you would carry that out. And then we, or the Commissioners, can allocate the money to support that effort, which is also significant here because there's other support that organizations get. In this case, we did a request for qualifications. We asked for a limited set of proposals, which made it a lot easier on the potential respondents. We got 2 responses. One was from a company in Utah that, as you see in their proposal, emphasized the fact they have a couple of Oregonians on their staff. There's a question about, we had asked for a form. We had said it was mandatory to return with their proposal, and they didn't give us that form back with their proposal. So that's one of the responses we got, and the other one we got was from the Convention and Visitors Bureau of Travel Lane County. And so the decisions for you today, you've had those proposals, is on the allocation of the 70% of the transient room tax funds and how you would like to allocate that in a grant. I think a threshold question is whether you want to consider the application from the firm Gumco, or whether you want to determine whether that's responsive, because if it's not responsive, then that limits, then that decision is made. And so far as if you've got the grant application from Travel Lane County, what they emphasized, what they talked about, and you can evaluate how much of the transient room tax funds you'd like to allocate to them of those that are available. And finally, as our county administrator has mentioned, one of the things that has been of significance to the commissioners is providing stability in the funding. And so we tried to provide for this in our recommendation by looking at the things that cause instability. One is the idea that we've been contracting for this and not newly contracting, and so there's no opportunity for renewal in advance. And if a grantee, historically, Travel Lane County, can run right up to the end of their contract before they know if they're going to be doing this again. So this provides some opportunity for mechanisms through a performance review during the term of the 3-year grant, for a performance review that would allow you to evaluate in advance and see if you want to renew the agreement, so that there would always be a year or 2 out ahead. The other thing that's mentioned in here is, and this has been of some significance, is during economic downturns, there's a need to, there's a perceived need to do more for marketing, or certainly not decrease marketing. But practically, what has been, at least so far as the granting of the funds have been granted, and not necessarily has there been any kind of reserve that would allow for the grant funds to then be allocated to maintain advertising in a time potentially when people are not wanting to travel quite so much. So that's what you have in for you. Really, the decisions ahead of you are just the allocation, the identification of grantees, allocation of funds, and direction to the county administrator to enter into a final agreement, which will be fairly brief, and we included a copy of that agreement in the RFQ that you have in front of you.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Board, I'm your representative to the Board of Travel Lane County. I'd like to point out, before I have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Chairman, is some of the board members are in the audience today. Dana Terrell is on the right there. Corey Buller is in the back, and Mr. Mike Brennan is before us. Mike and Dana, thank you for our work together at Food for Lane County all those years ago, and for the strong agency that you guys help provide in Food for Lane County. My question is, before us we have an order. There's no order number in my copy of it. Do you have that, Mr. Chair? And very good. And then also there's I'm looking at the electronic version. Under the therefore is that Gumco should not be awarded. Do we need to specify in the motion should not on that? Yes.
The intention here was I was trying to create a potential board order that would actually reflect the possibilities that the board has in front of it, Commissioner Farr. And so the threshold question, as I said, is should Gumco be awarded funds either based on was their proposal responsive, or was their proposal something the board would like to issue funds to? And so that's a should or should not decision. Once that's done, they didn't ask for all the funds, and the only other applicant is Travel Lane County. So then the question becomes, does the balance of the funds, and if none are awarded to the other, if the commission, it anticipates the commissioners would award the funds rather than, well, they're reserved for promotion, so this would be the only way to dispose of them.
Okay.
So that was intended to be a way that the commissioners could capture there.
And as a member of the board, I'm not in any, I don't need to recuse myself from this vote.
No, I don't see any reason to.
Just wanted to clarify that. Okay, then I'm ready for a motion whenever discussion is ready to move forward.
Okay. Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, on the second item, when you talked about provide for stabilization of grant funds through both language and proposed grants to allow the board to renew, and also the establishment of a reserve fund, how would you? So establishment of a reserve fund, where would that begin? Where would those dollars be? Where would those dollars come from? I guess is a question I would have if that's something we want to do. But on the first item, I just want to point out, so we can either all funds go to Travel Lane County or a portion of the funds go to Travel Lane County or GUMCO. I was at a interesting forum this last week. It was called an Oregon-China Economic Forum up in Clackamas County. And I heard something that was pretty intriguing to me, and it was from a Chinese American, obviously originally from China, does business here. He made an interesting point. He said, and business folks in China have really no idea where Oregon is, but they know where Eugene is. And the reason why is called Tracktown. Period. Conversational word. They know exactly where Eugene is and know where Hayward Field is, but they don't know where Oregon is. And I think that that's an important piece to put forward because right now, in my view, I think Travel Lane County does a great job for us. And not only that, but I pointed out, I think a few weeks ago at a board meeting that I hope folks were aware that Carrie was just recently appointed to the U.S. Travel Association Board of Directors. So she's on a U.S. board that talks about travel, and frankly, that's an incredible asset that we have for her as the head of Travel Lane County to be part of a national organization, and which I think is important. The other piece, and I mentioned Tracktown because here in the next in 5 years, we're going to have the World Games here, World Track and Field, World Outdoor Track and Field Games. I'm a member of the advisory committee. I don't do very much, so I'll just tell you that. And other than the fact, I'll mention a few things about transportation issues. But Carrie has been instrumental. She's worked right alongside with Vin on making sure that we get this here that the games came here. So number one to me is an easy one. From my perspective, I think we just all funds go to Travel Lane County. But so I want to go back to number two. How would you go about establishing the reserve funds, and where would those funds come from?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lycan, we would, first of all, what we're asking for is direction to the administrator to work with the grantee to work out those details. I think there are a couple of options that are certainly on the table. One could be that the grantee would hold the reserve, and the purpose really of a reserve is a stabilization reserve. Yeah. So that we do this, for all of our county departments that we require in the general fund at 10%. We have a minimum 10% reserve. 5% of that is for stabilization for cash flow purposes. And I think particularly because we're always going to see ups and downs in the economy. And transient room taxes, typically and historically are subject to fluctuation based on economic conditions. Do we have a desire to sort of have the ability to smooth out when you see a dip in the economy and in transient room tax collections, to be able to smooth that out as opposed to a significant reduction in the services provided? Because I think as the board recognizes and has talked about in recent meetings, those are often the times that we want to be out promoting our community as a destination. So one is that the grantee would retain that reserve and just provide a verification to the county that they have this reserve on hand for that purpose. The alternative is the county could maintain that reserve, and that it would be dedicated for the purpose of stabilization, not for any other purpose. So those are things that I think we can work out in coordination and collaboration with the grantee that you decide on.
Well, I appreciate that, that's a direction that I'm comfortable with, and again, I think it's just really up to I would just say it's up to the administrator working that out and see where we go from there. So I'm comfortable with that. I just want to make sure we're we're prepared, because the World Indoors came off as a success, and I was glad to see that. Matthew Centrowitz, gold medalist, that's great. And I don't know if people saw, but Randall Cunningham's high school daughter won the gold medal in the high jump. How's that for pretty amazing? But anyway, I'm off target here. But coming off the success of the World Indoor Track and Field Games, I mean, that's significant. It pales to what's going to happen with the outdoors. And I think that, so as long as we're in a position to be prepared here in the next 5 years, and I'm focusing on the games because that is going to bring that's over 200 countries with an enormous amount of influx of people that'll be coming here to Lane County and throughout the entire state of Oregon. So I'm just looking at so from the stabilization standpoint, that's really what I'm looking at, is not only this, but also other opportunities we have when it comes to tourism in between now and the next 5 years as well. So I'm comfortable with at least providing direction to talk about, if there's something we can, if some sort of agreement on whatever, if it's reserve or not, on the stabilization piece. But on number one, I'm really a believer that all funds go to Travel Lane County.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to add something to our county administrator's response, which is regarding a reserve fund. I think that Travel Lane County has been well managed, and I understand that they have some reserves. Part of this is housekeeping, but arguably in the past the money has been given for promotion during that year. And so if money is reserved from the tax year that isn't actually spent, then actually authorization from the board to retain money that was granted for promotion is a housekeeping measure that should be addressed in any event, whether it's held by Travel Lane County or whether the county would retain it. Probably isn't terribly important. What is important is that the tax revenue that is granted, that we're certain that ultimately that tax revenue is used for promotion, and that if there's a part put into a reserve, that it's put into a reserve that's a TRT reserve for stabilization, and then spent with the county's approval.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other comments? Okay. Is there a motion?
Thank you.
Mr. Carr?
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt Order 16-03-29-09 with a do not in section, sorry, it's my page here, with a should not regarding in section 100 therefore. But Jim, did I catch that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Nothing else needs to be added to that.
No, so long as your intention is to then grant all the funds to Travel Lane County, then that would be the result of checking that box.
Which is covered in item 3, so, okay, very good. So my motion then is to adopt Order 1603-29-9.
Second.
Any further discussion? I would just state that very supportive of Travel Lane County's work, and I know that in past years, in the 12 years that we've been here, they've been great partners. When we were first trying to get the very first, I think, track trials here, they came up with a large amount of resources and combined them with county resources and other revenues that made it a reality to make it here. So I do think it's mindful to have conversations about reserves and thinking a little bit towards the future, but I'll leave those conversations to the administrator to make sure that we're mindful of what the task is ahead and the challenges that we got, and make sure we work very well together as partners to do the best we can to promote this wonderful county that we live in. So to clarify, the motion is to pass the recommendation of the order saying that GUMCO should not be awarded any grant funds and all funds go to Travel Lane County. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimous. Thank you. And thanks for everyone that attended for this item for sticking with us this morning. So we'll move back now to Let me get my paperwork here. Under item 7, we have item B, which is order 16-03-29-08. It's in the matter of documenting performance auditor's annual performance evaluation and authorizing a change in compensation in accordance with the employment agreement. Again, we have Ms. Edwards, our Human Resources Director, and we have Ms. Miller, our performance auditor. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Stewart and Commissioners. We're here to document the performance auditor's annual performance evaluation and authorize a change in compensation in accordance with the employment agreement. The employment agreement with Ms. Miller was signed in January of 2015 and was effective on February 17th, 2015. On March 1st of this year, the board met with Ms. Miller in executive session to conduct her performance evaluation. Human Resources gathered feedback from Ms. Miller's peers and customers. Department directors and other key staff were sent feedback forms and asked to provide their input regarding the performance auditor's performance for the past year. 26 individuals were given the opportunity to provide input. 10 individuals took advantage of that opportunity. The feedback reflects input for the 4 values and 4 competencies described in the board's strategic plan. I'll just review those values. Diversity, respect, and empathy, pursuit of excellence and stewardship, customer service and public engagement, integrity, open, and accountable. The 4 competencies upon which that was based: working with others, business acumen, personal effectiveness, and communication. The feedback, including the comments, was compiled and provided to the commissioners during the performance evaluation conducted on March 1st. A guide for the board to provide feedback is to describe specific examples that demonstrate the most outstanding contributions and or achievements of the employee with regard to their performance. Describe specific examples of things the employee could improve upon in order to increase her job performance, and list goals and objectives for the coming year. The options provided: number 1, if the board determines that Ms. Miller's performance has been successful or better, then per the agreement, section 2.1, her compensation will increase from her current salary to the salary equivalent to the next step on the salary plan for Program Manager D61 or Step 8. Option number 2, if the board determines that Ms. Miller's performance has not been successful, she would not receive an increase, and in accordance with her employment agreement, neither would she suffer a reduction. The potential timing: if Ms. Miller's performance is deemed successful, staff will implement the salary increase for the next pay period, and the increase will be retroactive to February 17, 2016, per the employment agreement.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions, comments? Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. Ms. Miller, thank you. Over the course of the last year, Commissioner Larkin and I have spent quite a bit of time with you on the temporary committee, which is a little bit less temporary than we'd intended originally, but we're moving forward with assigning or making a recommendation on a permanent committee. I'd like to point out that throughout that year, you have exceeded all of my expectations in completing your work on time, completing your work in exemplary fashion, and giving us concepts and ideas that we otherwise wouldn't have gotten without the deep background that you brought to the job. I know during the phase where we were selecting, or where we had a committee to recommend the hiring of a performance auditor, Commissioner Larkin and I also sat on that committee, and you rose to the top as the person that we recommended at that point in time. I'm not going to put words into Commissioner Larkin's mouth, but I know that he did a great deal of extensive research, particularly with the Secretary of State's office, to look at your background, and you've not disappointed me particularly in any way in this last year. Looking forward to completing your work plan, looking forward to discussing next week some of the, your first project that's going to be completed that we discuss next week at our board meeting, and really looking forward to the years of working with you ahead of us. Very well done, Ms. Miller, and when the time comes, I'm going to be making a recommendation, or I'm going to be making a motion to pass the order. So thank you.
Other comments? Commissioner Larkin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would agree with Commissioner Farr's comments, and first of all, I've enjoyed, I think having a a front row seat, in a sense, working with you, and I appreciate the knowledge you bring to the position. Believe me, over the last few months, I've probably appeared over more audits than I care to think about. And what I will say is I'm glad you'll be the one conducting them, and we're doing the oversight. Believe me, I would rather be in that position and just, in a sense, providing the direction. But your background and professionalism, I think I would agree with Commissioner Farr. When we did the interviewing, you clearly rose to the top, and I think we made a wise choice there. And I was very impressed, actually, when we had our earlier discussion with the Sheriff's Office and with our with the contract that we have with our medical provider. And we really, Commissioner Farr opened it up immediately and focused right in on the area that when you did your risk assessment, that rose to the very top. And that's impressive. You were here for just a short time, but yet based on the risk that you did, that rose to the top, and that's the area we're going to be focusing on, as well as yourself, obviously, and conducting the audits. We look forward to that. And so I appreciate the value you're bringing to the office. Again, I apologize that past audits we can't seem to find, but at least we'll be starting in a position where, based on how orderly you are, because believe me, Commissioner Farr and I, we have these notebooks, and they're so in perfect order that I think in the future they're not going to have an issue finding what the past audits will be looking like. And so that's very important, because for someone like myself, I don't think I'd have the patience to actually be involved in conducting the audits. That's why you're here working for us, and I really look forward to your ongoing professionalism. Your former boss, Gary Blackmore, has great things to say about you, which I think says a lot, because I know Commissioner Sorensen knows Gary as well, and I don't think people realize that he brought his leadership at the Secretary of State's office as the chief auditor. Actually, several awards were given to the office because of the professionalism of the audits that were conducted. So I think we're very fortunate to have you here. Thanks.
Other comments? Commissioner Farr?
Mr. Chair, I move passage of order number 160329-08 in the matter of documenting performance auditors' annual performance evaluation and authorizing a change in compensation in accordance with the employment agreement, which includes Ms. Miller's compensation will be moved from her current salary to the equivalent of the next step, effective February 17, 2016.
Second.
Okay. Other comments? I guess I'd just like to say, Ms. Miller, thank you for what I deem great work this last year. Might have been a little frustrating at times. Maybe things didn't move quite as fast as we want to, as Commissioner Farr alluded to. We still have a temporary committee, still trying to get the formal committee up, and I know that we worked really hard to get the structure of your offices, the way it's going to function at the county, how you're going to report to the board, our relationship. I mean, all those are important items that have to be narrow, zeroed down so that the expectations can be met by all parties. And I'm looking forward to, we set the agenda today for next week, and I believe you'll be coming forward with some of your first audit work. So looking forward to that, and I thank you for the time that you take to meet with me to kind of give me updates on the work at hand. I also appreciate the regular emails. I think on a weekly basis you give us a recap of where you're at, what you're working on. So I'm very pleased, very thankful that you chose to come to Lane County, and this board has employed you. Looking forward to your audit work and helping us become the best, or continue to be the best that we can in serving our citizens. So thank you, Ms. Miller. Commissioner Farr?
And I'll just point out that the tiny delay in the work of the temporary committee was not any reflection on your work or on the committee's work, but it was more to do with public hearings regarding manual and code changes. So it's once again we're moving really at the best pace that we could in order to move forward with assigning a permanent committee. And next week everybody will have the thrill of the financial indicator report that you'll be giving to us, the first full report of your audits. So looking forward to that next week with the high excitement. So thank you very much.
Mr. Sorensen?
I'm just glad you're here. I'm glad that we're getting going with the audits, and thanks so much.
No further comments? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes unanimous. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Item 8 is our county administration. We'll start with announcements. Mr. Mokahiski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick things. The last board meeting, Commissioner Lycan asked a question. We were talking about the strategic plan update, and it was a really good question about succession planning and the turnover that we've seen, particularly in our Public Works Department, with the director retiring, assistant director moving on, county engineer moving on, and 22 voluntary separation incentive program applications being approved and folks moving on. So I wanted to share a couple things with the board. As it relates to an assistant director in Public Works, obviously, we're interested in maintaining a solid management team structure and leadership and during the transition there. So we've identified an interim assistant director of Public Works, and I want to share with you today that Judy Williams in County Administration will be serving as the interim Public Works, Assistant Public Works Director. You all know Judy. She's in our budget office. She's worked for Lane County for many years. She actually started in land management, so she's worked in Public Works before. She's been active and instrumental in the development and management of our county strategic plan, as well as the Public Works strategic plan. She's also been the division manager for parole and probation, and more recently been involved in finance, budget, labor issues, and management issues. And so we're excited to welcome Judy there. We think she'll be a great addition on an interim basis to help provide some continuity of service for Public Works. And then I also want to share, I was with the Public Works management team yesterday at their management team meeting, and they put together this spreadsheet, and you don't need to, I'll make it available if anyone's interested, but just for visual purposes to articulate that this is a spreadsheet that shows the vacant positions, not even the seasonal positions that we typically recruit for in parks and roads and in other areas, but just through the voluntary separation plan and the other positions that have recently become vacant. As the board knows, we have a weekly vacancy review process where our budget staff and HR review all vacant positions that are sought to be filled, and then I have a meeting each week to meet with the department staff that's requesting that, to review those and make sure that we're doing our due diligence and verifying it, making sure every position we're going out and filling is absolutely critical to service. And so Public Works has put together this spreadsheet just to identify the positions and the timing of filling those positions, where the recruitment is at, and verifying all of that. So I just want to share that. Again, it was I really appreciated the question from Commissioner Lycan, and we're putting a lot of effort into managing the number of vacancies that we've seen, particularly in Public Works and also throughout our organization, ensuring for good succession planning. And then finally, while we're on the Public Works theme, Commissioner Stewart and I had an opportunity, as we do each month, to go out and have lunch in a different department with employees. We have a monthly SAC lunch, and Commissioner Stewart has expressed interest and has been joining me on those. And so last Friday we had an opportunity to meet and have a SAC lunch with our waste management staff at the Glenwood transfer station, and so really good conversation there with our employees, and just updating on budget and other matters that we're working on, including our efforts to look at waste management operations ongoing to streamline costs and create efficiencies there. So we'll continue those and continue to provide you with updates. That's all I have, unless you have questions for me.
questions? Okay, next item is county council announcements.
Yes, Board, I have a couple of things I want to come back to you with. First of all, there was an item a while back about working on TRT and various issues surrounding the collection of it, the rate and whatnot. I wanted to advise you that as part of House Bill 4141 in the most recent short session, they created a statewide task force, and Mr. Kyler and I will be participating in that, and we'll come back to you with periodic updates. The other item that I wanted to bring to your attention is, and I think, Commissioner Bozevich, I'm striking out on the two individuals' names, but I've been in correspondence with some residents near Collard Lake Road who have requested that the board take some action with regard to that road. And what I'm seeking today is actually some direction from the board to bring Public Works back to you, because I think what you need is sort of a historical perspective, and I know that Public Works has done that work preliminarily, that basically from the time the thing was initially platted right up through today, and then I would let those folks know when that matter was going to come back to you before the board. So that's really all I'm looking at, is that is three head nods to have my staff in Public Works to begin to work on that. And the only other announcement I have is I would like to again thank the board for their comments today regarding my evaluation, but again, I want to emphasize that it is a team effort, and I have a fantastic staff, and they do the lion's share of the work. And finally, for Commissioner Likens,
put on an appel there. Good for you. So if I understand it, I do have a question, Mr. Dingle. So on a TRT collection rate task force, is that going to try to address some of these internet and Airbnb, some of these places that might be or not be paying revenue? Is that going to be part of it?
Chair Stewart, exactly. And also, I think the idea is to look at who's going to collect it, where's the most efficient way to collect it, make sure that it's uniform. Mm-hmm. In other words, that's part of the issue. There's a lot of sort of this going on, which is the person says, well, it's, for example, it's the internet company that's doing it. The internet company says, no, we're just a conduit. It's really up to the person who's actually putting the place up for it. So the idea is to work out all of those issues.
Perfect, great. Glad that is taking place. Then you needed direction on Collard Lake. As was mentioned, there's been some requests from the public for the board to take some action on Collard Lake Road. Agenda team, under the guidance of Mr. Dingle, feels it would be great to have a presentation from staff to kind of set the framework and be able to have the board give some direction, if any, on what to do with this matter. So is there head nods to bring this back? Commissioner Bozevich.
Yeah, I'd like to support that. And it was Willem Hagen and Sherry Harvey.
I have both of their names in my, and I believe it's a woman who's his neighbor. The two people I've been.
Sherry Harvey.
Yes, and they've been in correspondence. I know they've been including you.
And I will support having that brought back. In general, have a discussion of local access roads besides just the history of Collard Lake Road. But I do have other citizens that have asked about county maintenance of local access roads in other areas of my district. And I want to make sure that this discussion takes into account that global discussion of making a commitment on one local access road versus another, and where our discretionary authority is in that. I support having that come back as a board item, because I think this is for that area with the private road that has no longer is serviceable. This is becoming an only access into a neighborhood, so there's quite some concern.
And just to let you know, Commissioner Bozevich, I promised both of those individuals that I would keep them apprised of the developments as they go forward. So I'll let them know today what happened, and then as soon as I have a date from Ms. Jones for the actual presentation, I'll let them know that. And I'll be sure and include, they're both constituents in your district. I'll make sure that you get CC'd on all those emails.
Thank you.
Yeah. I believe you had support to do that. Great. Any other questions for council? We do have an executive session at 3:30, time certain, so we'll be seeing you at 3:30. Next, item 10, Commissioner business. Any announcements? Mr. Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I am so pleased to announce that after 2 years, the committee I served on, the Bike Ped Planning Committee for the Oregon Department of Transportation, our draft plan is completed. We're all in agreement, including metro area of Portland, urban areas here, rural areas in eastern Oregon, and throughout the entire state. We're in agreement, and it'll move forward to be officially adopted by the Oregon Transportation Commission in May, at their May meeting. This is a 20-year plan on bike ped throughout the entire state. I was happy to serve on it, but I must tell you, after 2 years, I'm glad it has concluded. And but it was very worthwhile. It was a great group and people I was able to serve with. And big thanks to ODOT for their work on it, but because they really had to deal with different opinions and thoughts in every part in the entire state to actually get a plan in place. So I was very pleased on that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I attended last week. AOC and Clackamas County were involved in hosting the Oregon-China Economic Forum in Oregon City, and it was great. And in fact, I really want to say thank you to Commissioner Hyde and Commissioner Schrader, Commissioner Hyde of Columbia County, Commissioner Schrader of Clackamas County, who are the co-chairs of our Economic Development Committee. They made some comments. Commissioner Schrader clearly called out very strongly advanced wood products, including cross-laminated timber. And you had commissioners there. You had people from Chinese Americans there. You had the from the consulate's office was there. The consul himself was there. And so it was very well attended. But I think it was really an opportunity to talk about how we can continue to improve not just trade, just strictly going from China to the United States, but instead, for instance, the advanced wood products opportunity that can be really, has a real potential to be part of something here in the state of Oregon, and how we can advance that and export to China as well. And great to hearing from the Chinese Americans who came here and are now citizens of the United States that have developed businesses here, including Ocean, what's his last name? Anyway, he has a solar panel manufacturing plant right here in Eugene, and has been doing this for quite some time. And so it was a great forum, and I was glad to be there.
Other announcements? Mr. Farr?
Thank you. Ms. Mokrajewski, I just want to point out that the Equity and Access Task Force has been meeting pretty actively for the last 6 months or so, and we culminated the meeting thus far with a public forum last week, which was pretty well attended. Some very good discussion at the public forum last week, and looking forward to an agenda item next week regarding the Equity and Access Task Force and recommendations coming out of that task force. I had a chance to sit more or less in the back row of the task force, but participate in some of the discussions, and really appreciate the direction that it went, appreciate the help from George Russell on the task force on a volunteer basis, and Greg Rickoff provided some great input to the members of that task force. Thank you very much for convening that. You know, it was just a little over 2 years ago that I was standing on the tarmac, as it were, in Washington, D.C., and you called me accepting the job of Lane County Administrator. And it's amazing how many things have happened in the last 2 years. Thank you very much.
Other announcements? Okay. We'll move to agenda team requests. I have one I'd like to present to the board today. I received an email from Mayor Coey of Oak Ridge. He is asking us if, as you know, Oak Ridge is in a containment area for parts per million, 2.5 violations, air quality, and he is asking us to consider some sort of an IGA or some sort of help that will help them deal with the surrounding areas of Leduc Road and some of Highway 58, some of the limits that are outside the city limits that they believe are contributing to the potential violations. It's incredibly important that for Oak Ridge's future to be able to meet these particulate matters, air quality concerns, if they can get out of the containment area, and that it opens the opportunity for some businesses to locate up there. So what I'm asking you today is would you entertain an agenda item that would bring both the city of Oak Ridge and El Rapa under an item to make a specific request to the board or explain the situation out a little bit in greater detail? So it looks like I got head nods for that. Thank you very much for that important item. Other agenda item requests or work sessions? Okay. So we do have an executive session, but it's this afternoon. We don't need one at this time. Is there any other business before we recess until 1:30? Okay, I would state that this afternoon we have 3 public works items, one for parks, one for our surveyors department, and one for capital projects in regards to the Forest Work Camp. And then our executive session is a time certain at 3:30. So at this time, we will recess until 1:30 back here at Harris Hall.
You know, Mayor,